Today, we're going to talk about drum preparation and how you can take your drums from this to this. I'm going to talk about my approach. I'm going to talk about tips I've got when it comes to sample replacement, when it comes to tightening up the phase relationships, all of the things that you can do and many ways to do it. Let's get started. Alright, so drums are a really important part of every mix. If they're not hitting properly, the mix just doesn't have the feeling and it's not going to translate the way that you want it to on all systems. And it's been a big journey for me, and I'm still learning every day, but hopefully these tips are really going to help. So the first thing that I do every time with drums is I'm checking the phase. Now there's many ways you can do that, but my favorite is to just zoom on in there. Now these were recorded properly, so they should all be in phase, but we can see, so our kick drums in phase with each other, that's good. And if we find a snare transient, that's always pretty handy here. We can zoom on in and we can see that actually the phase relationship of the snare is good with the toms as well, and the kick's not too bad. It's sort of actually out of phase a little bit with itself there, the snare bleed in the kick. But going down to our overheads, we can see our snare's going down and then up, and our overheads are also going down and then up. So that's all good signs, all sorts of things that we can work with. We can see obviously there's a little bit of a time discrepancy from when the initial transient hits on, say, the close mic of the snare to when it hits with our overheads there. And there are things we can do with that. So one thing that we can do, an easy tip, free in your DAW for anyone to use, is time adjuster. So if we're going to go for our snare, let's say, and we want to improve the phase relationship between our snare and our overheads to tighten that up, what we can do is we can use tab to transient, so we can press tab, or let's try that again where we zoomed out a little bit. Tab to transient, it's going to hit the first transient of the snare almost. In fact, it's actually linked itself to the tom, because I've got these groups. I'm going to ungroup and then go again. There we go, now we're on a snare drum. And what we can do is we can measure by clicking shift and dragging how long is it until it hits in the overheads, and we can come up here and we can change our meter in here to samples, and we can see that the length of that is actually 134 samples. So what I could do is I could type in time, get my time adjuster plugin, type in 134 samples, and we can see that the phase is already accurate, it's going the right way. And now listening to that, we should have a slightly tighter snare. I'll do a little bit of a before and with. Now it is subtle, but it is helping tighten up that snare. We're getting more of the punch, more of the attack back. We can see that our snare top and bottom are actually very closely aligned, so we should copy that down, and that's the same kind of thing. And then we could move on, we could do the same thing with the kick. Now if we listen to our kick and our snare time adjusted, if I highlight all of them and turn them off, here's before and after. And that's all well and good, definitely works, but there are more advanced tools. So the method that I actually use on a daily basis when I'm doing this is auto align. Now to do this properly, I'm actually going to split my overheads out to mono, because there are slight differences left to right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of my loose mics, my overheads, my snares, my kick in and my kick out, and I'm going to put on auto align 2. Now what Auto Align 2 is doing is, over a period of at least 30 seconds, longer if you can, is it's taking all the data, it's taking all the information, and it's working out where do I need to flip the phase, where do I need to adjust the timing in milliseconds. It's giving you the tightest possible phase relationship across as an average. It's really clever, doesn't take very long. I'm going to engage it now, we'll fast forward this bit and we'll come back when it's all tightened up. Now jumping back in, we can see that it's made adjustments. It's worked out it was 160 samples different, you know, for the snare, from its, you know, various different points, and these are all like the spectral phase adjustments. So it's rotated the phase in different parts. Sometimes it's left like, you know, if it's green, it's done nothing. If it's sort of red, it's done quite a lot. And you can choose which mic to make the performance time or the main point of sort of phase correction. So I always go with the snare top because it's the loudest transient. Everything else thereafter kind of follows from that. And we can do like a before and after with this little button up here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play a section, and it's not a drastic difference. It's subtle, but it does tighten everything up, brings back the punch in the kick drum, punch in the snare drum, and makes your drums feel more cohesive. So here's before. And here's after. So you can really hear that extra thump, that low end in the kick drum, the tightness and the cohesion of the snare drum. And I'll find a section here with the toms as well so we can listen to what they do. I'll do a little loop. So here's some toms. Here's after. Really brought those toms forward. Okay, so what I typically do is once I've done this, I commit to it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll come back with it all ready to go. Cool. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've committed our tracks to audio so that the time adjustment, Auto Align, doesn't need to be run anymore. It is a little bit CPU heavy. It adds a bit of delay compensation that when we get into the mix we don't want. And what we've got now is our perfectly time aligned tracks all ready to rock and sounding fantastic. So we can hear them once more. Punchy, the kick drum's big, the snare drum's big, they're sounding great. We can take this one step further though, because to fit in this mix, and I'll play you a little bit, we're going to need some help. So here we go. Let's have a listen in context now. So sounding great. What I'm hearing though is that the kick could use a little bit more subs, maybe a little bit more punch, and the snare just a little bit more brightness and a bit more crack, and maybe a little bit more ambience. How can we do that? Yeah, we could go for EQ. We're going to do that later anyway as we get through the mix and add sort of things. But before we even reach for an EQ or a compressor, we can probably achieve 80-90% of what we need just with samples. And I'm going to show you the way that I do it. So I'm going to grab Command Shift N to create a stereo auxiliary, and I'm going to create two of these, one for the kick and one for the snare. And I'm going to call these K trigger and S trigger for kick and snare trigger. And I'm going to make these dark red, and I'm going to drag them to where I need them, one by the kick, the other by the snare. I'm going to put a bus input for these, bus 1 and 2, bus 3 and 4, and I'm even going to go as far as to rename these K-trig, S-trig. And what we've got here is two auxiliaries ready to receive signal from whatever output I choose. Now, this is where it's important. So I've got two different plugins. I've got Drum Replacer. Don't use this one a whole bunch. It's pretty snazzy. I just haven't really got into it yet. I probably should dedicate some time to learning it, but it's not the one that I use at the moment. But what I do use is Slate's Trigger 2. This plugin's awesome. and it comes with a whole bunch of different sounds, different kits, different libraries that you can choose. I've gone ahead and I've already got my quick kick preset, which is a close mic, an overhead and a room mic, and I've got the same for my quick snare. I find that these usually are a great starting point. They give me the sort of snap that I need, or the sort of kick lows that I need, and yeah, they're just a good place to start from and kind of make a decision about. And now I'm going to trigger from the kick in, so I'm going to type K-trig, and I'm going to send it full, and that's going to send and pre-fade, in fact, so that whatever I do on this fader, it makes no difference to how it's triggering my kick trigger. And on my snare top, I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to send it full tilt pre-fade. Now what that does is it sends an exact copy, irrespective of what the fade is doing, to my trigger tracks, meaning that I get hassle-free triggering no matter where I've got those levels set in the mix. It's always going to be consistent. We're going to do a few more steps in a minute using some other third-party plugins that I really enjoy to help keep that more consistent if we need it. I'm going to show you just in case you need it so you can apply it to your session. So let's have a listen to this kick trigger here. Now in Slate Trigger there are a bunch of things we can adjust, like how low we want in terms of amplitude to trigger the kick or to trigger the track in general, how fast we want it to trigger. If it's really, like if it's metal and you've got lots of double kicks, you know, the re-trigger speed could come into play here, and then the overall sensitivity. But as you can see when I play this, our kick is triggering it nicely. That little double kick there was a little bit of an indication that the re-trigger speed might be a bit too fast, so we can adjust that and turn down on the sensitivity a little bit as well. Nice, so that's triggering away great. So now we need to hear it in context, because there will be a phase relationship with the kick, and now we can flip it here inside the plugin. Typically I don't do that. I'm going to grab trusty Pro Q, and I'm going to do it with Pro Q down here if it's necessary. And we'll know it's necessary because the low end will either be really robust and it'll be hitting, and so the phase is right, or the phase is wrong and it's not going to give us a low end. In fact, the kick's going to end up sounding thin and weak. So we'll be able to tell just by listening. So let's have a look. Right away we can tell those samples are in phase, they're doing a great job, and that's really tightened up our kick drum and helped to add some punch. In the kicks themselves, we can actually hear some bleed. Let's have a listen to that. So that's the kick in, here's the kick out. And I think there's a little bit of something we can do. So I've got two plugins for this, but I'm just going to use this one to start with, and it's Drum Leveler. This is made by the same company that do the Auto Align. It's a great plugin. Basically what it is it's upwards and downwards compression where needed in a very transparent and basically indetectable way. You do that with your compression amount here. I find the standard is a good place to start, to be honest. You know, there's a reason they set it up like this. And then you've got your gate, and you can completely gate it, or you can reverse gate it and overemphasize that bleed. It's a fantastic plugin. Let's listen to the kick in and see if we can't tidy it up a little bit. Magic. Let's copy and paste that, in fact, over to the kick out and see if we get similar results here. Okay, so this is an example of where we're going to need another plugin first, and what I'm going to use is the Oxford drum gate. This is an awesome drum gate. It's very intelligent. It's got spectral detection circuit, so you can really just zero in on the drum you want. So we're going to go, we know it's a kick drum, I'm going to play for it, and I'm going to muck around with the detection, and maybe if I need to, the spectral decay, but I often don't have to go that far. So already that's tightened it right up. I might drag the decay out just a little bit here so we're not, it doesn't feel quite so tacky and sort of feels a bit more natural. Okay, so you can hear that's let a little bit more bleed back in, but it has cleaned it up, and now I can go to our drum leveler and I can muck around with the gate in here. So if we do a before and after, so here's before. Lots of snare bleed to our after. Much more manageable, much more focused. Let's turn our attention to our snare drum now. So again, let's have a listen to just our snare trigger. It's triggering away nicely, that's great. We can go and listen to our snare top, which is the one that's triggering that track, and hear what's going on there. Little bit of bleed. Let's try our drum leveler trick. Works a charm. It's already, you know, making that snare more consistent. The reason, why would you want your snare more consistent or your kick more consistent? Can't I just use a compressor? Yes, you can, but the compressor is going to change the envelope of the sound, and it's going to affect the overall kind of timbre of it. This is just making it consistent, and then we can add our compression and our envelope shaping and changing of the timbre with the EQ, with saturation, all of those things that are going to affect the transient as well. But in this case, we're just trying to get it consistent so it sits in the mix nicely and also gives us clean triggers. So you can hear that's already taken care of that. We'll just check the snare bottom just in case we've got to do anything there. Honestly, nothing a high pass filter can't fix, so we're going to leave that alone. And then we'll listen in context with our our snare top and bottom and our trigger track just to check again the phase of everything. So we'll make sure we're in phase here like we did last time. See, this is where phase is neither good or bad. It's just a relationship, and you can use it creatively to make a choice. I personally like it with the phase natural, but you know, there is something to be said for it being inverted because it gave it more kind of high frequency, and you got a little bit more of that roominess about it. But there you go. So that's, now we've got time aligned drums, phase aligned drums, and we've got slightly more consistently leveled drums, and we've got triggers in place for the kick and the snare to give that little bit extra body. So we should listen to what all of those things are doing in context. Here's before, and then I'll drop it back in for an after. And here's our after with our triggers as well. Much more in your face, much more consistent, sounding much more towards a mixed drum kit for this track. And we haven't even touched compression yet. Apart from our leveling, we haven't touched any dynamic control, no mix bus, no drum bus, no nothing. One last step that I do on these drums before I start to apply other things in the mix is I would do the same to the toms. So we can do this in two ways. There's a long, laborious way, which often works better, unfortunately, which is manually going in, finding the tom hits, right, zooming on up to it. Make sure I turn my group off here so I don't affect everything. Pressing B to break it, going to just after the tom, pressing B to break it again, and muting everything else. So all you've got is a clean tom hit. That's fine. Sometimes that's what you've got to do. It just is what it is. On this, I actually think that the tom tracks, and if we listen to the rack and the floor here where there are lots of toms, I think the bleed is low enough that I can get away with using drum leveler, to be honest. So let's try, see how we go. Cool, well let's give it a whirl. Let's bring up drum leveler on both tracks. We'll start with just the rack and we'll isolate it, and we'll go from here and we'll see what drum leveler can do with its gate. I mean, that's tightened it up enough for me, and it's even also because of the compression. I mean, we could go more or less with this. You know, I'll show you sort of what it can do. Really tightens it up, or less, you know, the opposite way. Actually turns it down. So 50% honestly works pretty good. Let's go to the floor track and see what we're doing there. We've got a section here. Problem solved. Now, getting rid of bleed is not always an appropriate thing to do. Sometimes you want that. It adds cohesion and it adds kind of fullness and flavour to the drum kit. On this context, getting rid of the bleed in the toms means that later in the mix I can push them up really loud. I can get the levels high, I can do parallel compression and really overemphasize those toms without bringing up cymbal harshness, snare bleed that we don't want, that affects the timbre of the snare and things like that. So drum leveler by Sound Radix, auto align by Sound Radix, in my opinion, two must-haves if you're mixing a lot of acoustic drums. They're not cheap, but they are worth it every day of the week. So now we can go back to our before and after. So I'm going to just mute our triggers again, and I'm going to turn off all of our plugins here. They sound good. They've been time aligned and phase aligned, but now with all of our tricks, they are going to sound that next level. I'm going to try that phase on the snare with the overheads in because it might make a difference to us here. Definitely natural phase. It does get pushed back into the mix when the phase is reversed, but it's good to check. Now in the context of the mix, those drums already, without compression, without EQ, without saturation, they're already starting to really cut through the mix, and that's the name of the game. It's just getting those drums to sound punchy, big, consistent, so that they cut without doing a heap of EQ, without doing a heap of compression. For sure, now, you know, we could combine our snare tracks together in a group here, you know, and we could add some compression just to sort of hear what that sounds like. So here's our snare drum on its own. You know, fan favorite for me and for a lot of people is a distressor. It's a great tool. I've got two of them down here in the rack. I use them on every mix. The plugin sounds awesome, so for this we can sort of demonstrate. I'm just going to use some go-to settings here for me and get some compression going. Pretty snappy, you know, we could hear that in context now. let's go to a section where there's lots of snare. So just from that one example, you can see how we've got our consistency, things are sitting nicely, they're sounding great. Now we can make those kind of envelope decisions, those tonal choices, using compression. You know, the next step on, maybe we brighten this up with a 550 EQ or something like that. APIs always go pretty well. Let's see if we add a bit of 10K shine, how it pokes through. You know, we're already starting to get there. This is already coming to life and starting to feel a bit more like a polished drum mix, and we haven't even touched overall drum bus compression yet. We've gone nowhere near sort of mix bus, which is my first port of call. I do top down mixing. So yeah, hopefully those tips are handy. Give them a go. If you can't, you know, get access to a demo of Drum Leveler or something like that, there are other tools out there. You know, really, if you wanted to go drum by drum after you've done your gating and everything, you can use any gate you like. Yes, Oxford Drum Gate's amazing, but there are other ones out there. You could even go, it's going to take a long time, but like hit by hit and kind of use clip gain or trim automation to raise or lower it. We do that quite a lot with vocals to keep them consistent. You can do it with drums too. If you've got the money, those two plugins, game changer. Yeah, happy mixing.